Cool. So welcome to Virtual VTDD. Today we're going to talking with Chris Simon. He's going to be presenting his talk, which he will describe in a second. Before we do anything about this, I have shared a mirror board just there. Please open it up. The mirror is there for kind of making some interactions with the crowd a bit easier. If you do want to ask questions, we would really, really appreciate it if you could turn on the camera so that we are not feeling like we're talking to the void. If you feel uncomfortable, obviously don't do it. And without further ado, and also with special thanks, Chris, you go for it.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's really nice to be joining this community at this unusual time for the group, I gather. I think there's some people here from Australia maybe, but also from Europe and the UK, and maybe all over the world. So if you are on the Miro board, I'm going to ask you to take a bit of a look at some questions for the audience that I've put up at the top. And you can see there's 4. How do you document your ubiquitous language? If you do, how do you help new starters learn the ubiquitous language during onboarding? How do you ensure the ubiquitous language stays consistent with evolving business usage? And where are you joining us from? Now, if hopefully the last one at least is very easy to answer, you can grab a little green sticky and drag it to wherever you are. And I'm just kind of curious as to where everyone is in the call. I feel like probably I should share my screen just in case, people are not able to jump on the Miro board and for the live stream recording. So just give me 1 second and I will do that. Okay. Oh, this is cool. I love seeing all the dots appearing here. So we're mostly in different parts of Europe, and I'm going to guess most of these dots out here are Sydney, which obviously is where I am in Australia, and people all over Europe. Wow. Joining us from Algeria. Oh no, that was a dot on its way somewhere else. With the other questions, I'm just going to give people a few seconds to review them. What I'm going to do is do Miro voting so that everyone can sort of give us an answer. But if you see an answer you'd like to put that isn't there already, please feel free to copy and paste one of the stickies and put your thoughts in there. I'm completely unsurprised that there is nobody in either North or South America joining us because it's the middle of the night over there. And everybody is just getting very excited about Explore DDD, which is a very exciting conference that's happening over there with Paul Rayner and a whole bunch of other cool people. And I assume that mostly on this call, we have all of the DDD people who would like to be there but are not, because that's certainly me. Cool. Well, I think hopefully that's enough time for everybody to have had a bit of a browse around. So what I'm going to do is start a poll to somehow remove the voting. So we're going to do a 2 votes per audience member for 1 minute of the sticky notes in this section. So although it looks like a few people are still adding some, so I might wait a second then. I don't think I'll ever get bored of watching all of these names flying around a Miro board. Okay, let's do this then. So we're going to vote on the first one. How do you document your ubiquitous language? So I'll give you 2 votes because you might have multiple ways of doing it. And we're going to vote just on the sticky notes and 1 minute. And the voting starts now. We're halfway through the voting. 15 people voted, 5 left. It's going down. 20 seconds. Anybody have any predictions as to what the outcome of the vote's going to be? I suspect most of us feel like the we don't sticky will get the most votes. Okay.
I would say we don't. We'll win.
There we go. What do we got? Processing the results. There we go. No, manually in a wiki, and we don't are the 2 biggest votes. There we go. A few people using some tooling, 1 person in a database. This is actually much better than I expected. I thought there was a lot less ubiquitous language documentation happening, but this is really cool. I should have put a sticky there for what is it, a ubiquitous language, just in case anyone's not aware. But since this is virtual DDD, I kind of assumed everyone joining would know. Okay, so we got Confluence. So that's kind of a wiki trying to force usage for people in structured files, code comments, as unsurprisingly, lots of we don't. But yeah, plenty of other things as well. So that's cool. Congratulations. You all document your ubiquitous language much better than I thought you did. So now we're going to vote on something related to new starters. So I'm going to start a new vote, and it's this panel here. How do you help new starters learn the ubiquitous language during onboarding? Again, we'll do 2 votes, 1 minute for the sticky notes. Starting the vote now. Twenty-five seconds left. I am hoping that more people will not be answering we don't in this case. And here we go, preparing the results. I love seeing eventual consistency in action with the vote surfacing. Allow them to talk to domain experts. That's cool. Ask them to read the docs. We don't. Yes, that gets quite a few as usual. Cool. So walk through on a domain map. Nice. Onboarding with domain storytelling. Some people doing formal training. Some people doing bite-sized architecture sections. Excellent work there. Asking them to read the code. Some people, 1 person onboarding with an event storm. And we had Excel sheet, which I think might have been a copy from the other one. Cool. So we can sort of see a trend here. I'd say it seems like it's kind of 50-50 split between teams that are doing good documentation and not. And at least in this case, there's a decent number of teams providing some level of support around onboarding. Now we'll see how you go over time as things change. So 2 votes, 1 minute, sticky notes, and start. This is the last poll of the evening / morning. So, oh, lots of we don'ts. I think maybe we're people in the middle of changing things when I started it.
This is your eventual consistency now.
Exactly.
Also, the question there should be a bonus question for how do you wish you do it? Because you're like, oh, but that's not what we do.
Absolutely. Now, because we don't was duplicated, we have to add it up. So we got 12, 13. So 13 votes for we don't. Next most popular, 5 by regularly updating the shared glossary. So I think, yeah, this is not too surprising. And I suspect most of us can relate to this sense that sometimes we capture things in documentation. Sometimes we help people when they're new, but over time, there's a sense that things atrophy and decay, and keeping things up to date is really hard. I'm just going to revisit the map while we're here. Excellent. So lots of people spread out all over Europe, Greece, UK, all over mainland. Exciting. And a few people down in Australia too. So it's nice to see my fellow Australians on the call. Thanks for joining. So we are talking here about managing domain knowledge, and I appreciate you taking the time there to answer those votes. I hope it was interesting for you to see what other people are doing and to consider for yourself what you're doing. I'm going to spend tonight a little bit of time doing some theory, or I should say some opinions. It's not really theory, it's more my opinion. And after that, I'm going to tell you a tool that I've been working on, which is attempting to support people who are trying to do a better job in this space of managing their domain knowledge. Now, because I'm a super big fan of systems thinking and systems theory, we're going to start by considering managing knowledge through the lens of systems thinking. But because not everybody knows exactly what systems thinking is all about, I'm going to start with a little bit of a preamble to set the scene here. So if we ask ourselves, what is a system? Now, a lot of us working as developers, we probably would maybe jump to the conclusion of talking about technology or software or containers or microservices or some sort of technology oriented answer. But we do have a definition from this wonderful book by Donella Meadows, Thinking in Systems. I thoroughly recommend it. If you're on the Miro board, this link will take you to Amazon. And she defines it as a system as an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something, a function or a purpose. So to talk about that more concretely, or to give you a visualization of it, we can say we have a system is two interconnected elements, and there's some sort of purpose. Now, I've put purpose off to the side because I think purpose is sometimes a bit subjective. Depends on your perspective. I just realized people might not necessarily know exactly where I am, so I'm going to bring everyone to me to follow me while I'm navigating the board here. Hope that's okay. So we've got a definition of a system, a set of interconnected elements, coherently organized for a purpose. But the reality is we don't just build systems, do we? We build socio-technical systems. Now, you've probably seen this term coming up a lot lately. It's becoming very, very prevalent across our industry. Things like team topologies and other sort of practices and ideas are revisiting the idea of socio-technical systems. It's not necessarily a new idea. It's been around since, I think, the early 20th century. And it started not even in what we think of these days as technology. It wasn't talking about software systems or computer systems. It was talking about coal miners. But I'm not an expert on the history of it, so I'm not going to delve too much into it. But socio-technical systems is one that considers requirements spanning hardware, software, personal, and community aspects. It applies an understanding of the social structures, roles, and rights, i.e. the social sciences, to inform the design of systems that involve communities of people and technology. So another way of thinking about that is a socio-technical system is a system where some of the elements are human and some of the elements are software or non-human. Might be not necessarily be software, but we've got a mix of different types of elements and there's an interconnection between them. Now, the last sort of system definition that is really important to understand the way I think about this stuff is open versus closed systems. So an open system is one, as opposed to a closed system, is where there's a flow, sometimes called an import or an export, or an interaction between components and the environment, which critically results in the modification or evolution of the system components. So I think that if we look at it this way, we can say we have an open socio-technical system with social elements, humans, technical elements such as software, and an environment, which consists of a whole bunch of stuff: humans, non-humans, technology, biospheres, climate, laws, regulations, lots and lots of other things that I have not got the space to list. And there's an interconnection there. And critically, the flow across the boundary causes the interior of the system to evolve and change. And this is a really, really important aspect of the theory. And I think as I describe it in this way, I'm hoping most of you are nodding your heads and saying, yeah, that feels like the world I live in. That feels like the kinds of systems I work on. But one thing that's kind of interesting when you start talking about open systems is that the boundary can get very hard to identify. So let's just consider, what kind of things cross the outer boundary of an open socio-technical system? You might think about things like market signals. They cross the boundary and cause us to change the system. We get data and technology-oriented things crossing the boundary: messages and API calls, HTTP requests and responses. Maybe regulations cross the boundary, or auditors come in. Maybe there's policies. Obviously, there's a data flow in and out. But things like feature requests are crossing the boundary and causing us to change the system. People cross the boundary. We defined our open socio-technical system as comprising of components that are human. And so at some point, a person who is not part of our system, say not an employee, becomes an employee. They're now part of the system. People who were not customers become customers. And once customers, you could argue that they are part of the system. We also have maybe malicious things trying to cross the boundary, like hacking attempts. And we have vendor systems. As we acquire them and bring them into our system, they become part of the system. And as a result, they change the system. So maybe it's instructive to think about what kind of things don't cross the boundary or the outer boundary. I think about things like logs, commands and events as we know them in the DDD space, internal alerting, maybe support requests from customers. I've put vendors in both spaces, but the vendors themselves, are they part of our system? Customers, are they actually part of the system or not? It's kind of tricky. Are they not crossing the outer boundary? Are they just part of the internal system? Maybe they're crossing internal boundaries. It gets really tricky to actually nail down what is the boundary when you've got things flowing back and forth across it. Now, I think that as designers and architects, sometimes we have this temptation to focus on what we can control, what we can design, what are the elements that we can influence, and what can we not control and design. And there's a temptation to think that because we're designing the system, anything that we don't design is not the system. But my view on this is that it's a little bit more subtle than that. It's a continuum. When we think about how much we control or influence the system, at one end, we've got components that never act as we intend them to. And I think you could argue that those things are maybe not inside the system, but they influence it across the boundary. At the other end, things that always act as we intend them to. But in the middle, maybe usually acts as we intend, or sometimes act as we intend. And all of these elements, which are all components of our system: customers, employees, code, vendors, libraries, infrastructure, job candidates, you could plot them here. Now, this is a subjective assessment. This is just what I think. But I'm sure that you can imagine for yourself other elements of your system. And when you start to think about it, even though we might enter the world of open socio-technical systems thinking, okay, technology is over here and humans are over there, the reality is that you can chart them on a continuum. And just as code doesn't always act as we intend, often employees and customers do follow processes that we design for them. So we can design open socio-technical systems that include human processes and people, as long as we take into account the fact that not necessarily everyone is going to behave the way we expect it. And this is often a source of confusion for people who think, I'm just building a technical system that is utterly predictable and the code will do what I write it to do and everything will be fine. Because all of these things are going on. There's non-technology components to your system, and there's the fact that all of these components exist on a continuum in relation to how much they behave the way you think they will. And this can often be a source of surprise. And I stuck LLMs over here because if you think that people are bad, wait until you start seeing the kind of ways LLMs are going to behave if you start integrating those into your systems. So we've got open socio-technical systems and we've got information flowing around. So how do we think about domain knowledge in this world? Where does it actually come from? Where does domain knowledge come from? Does it flow across a boundary? Is it produced inside the system? Let's consider that for a minute. So we have this kind of naive idea that we have some ephemeral, wonderful domain expert who knows everything. They have acquired through working in the domain knowledge about the domain. And then as developers, we acquire that knowledge through some sort of collaborative modeling technique. And it's a linear, singular, unidirectional flow. This is kind of, I think, the initial presentation of how DDD works, or the naive interpretation that, if we could just find the domain experts and just do enough collaboration with them, we would get all the knowledge we need out of them and everything would be fine. But obviously it's not quite that straightforward. Oh, it seems I've duplicated that slide. Bear with me 1 second. In reality, domain experts, they are acquiring domain knowledge, but they're also producing it. They're changing the domain. They're working in it and evolving it. The domain is not static. There are other parts of the open socio-technical system that are affecting domain knowledge, setting context and constraints through laws and regulations. There are vendors who are constraining our domain knowledge by providing components that we might be leveraging, and they constrain our solution, which means they're part of the problem space. And in many cases, they start to be thought of as part of the domain. And as developers, although we do acquire domain knowledge through modeling and other processes, we end up changing the domain as well by producing solutions that become part of it. And so the domain knowledge is evolving constantly from all of these different directions. And as developers, we're kind of desperately trying to keep up with those changes. But domain knowledge, if we think about it in this way, it's easy to think about it in this abstract notion that there's this pool of domain knowledge somewhere that is being managed through these processes. But in reality, it's distributed. It's understood by a customer. It's in their heads. It's understood by a domain expert. It's in their heads, not an export. That's a typo. It's understood by the developers. Developers become custodians of domain knowledge. How often have you worked in an environment where actually the developer who'd been there for 20 years was the domain expert and knew more about the business and the domain than anybody else? And of course, the knowledge is encoded in the system. This is what DDD is all about. We're trying to understand the domain better. We're trying to represent that domain into our code in a way that is evolvable and understandable and uses the ubiquitous language of the domain so that people can read the code and make sense of it. So domain knowledge is not just this one thing. It's spread out, it's distributed. It exists as components of the socio-technical system. And I like to think that the knowledge in our heads is a component of the socio-technical system. The interesting thing about that is that we're all different, but we'll get onto that in a second. So what happens when we have system changes? Because remember, an open system, as opposed to a closed system, can be defined as one in which there's flow, import and export, interaction between components in the environment, resulting in modification or evolution of the system components. So in other words, as developers, we are components of the system and we are changing the system. We are the system changing itself. And this is a sort of a nod to a quote from Carl Sagan, who says that we are the universe understanding itself because we are made of dust from stars. So yes, we're a component of an open socio-technical system. The knowledge in our heads is a component of us. So the domain knowledge as we understand it is a component of the system. And we can see this when we have requests coming in to change the system. We have a change request and we're interpreting it through the lens of our current understanding. And in interpreting it and attempting to enact the change, we're evolving our understanding and our mental models. And that knowledge in our heads, that component is being changed, and hopefully it's being changed in sync with the changes that we're making to the technology. Because what we're trying to do is interpret it, evolve our underlevels, and update the code to reflect our new understanding. And I really love Andrea's bite-sized architecture, and hopefully I haven't misquoted her, but I saw a talk she gave where she said, you ship what's in your developers' heads. And that really stuck with me because I think this open socio-technical model where we think about knowledge as a component of the system, like knowledge in people's brains is a component of the system. This is a really true statement. What we're saying is that what's in people's heads is what gets shipped. But shortly after I saw Andrea give this talk, I saw someone else give a talk who said something completely the opposite. You ship what's in your code, not what's in your developers' heads. And I thought to myself, how can two people who I admire and respect be so at odds with what they're saying? So if you're not familiar with Tudor Gerber, he's the creator of a technique called moldable development, which is a set of IDE tools that are attempting to make it easy for you to construct new tools on the fly for inspecting your code and treating your code as data so that you can better understand the code and the structure of the code. And it's a very interesting idea. And so he's saying that, and I think he's right as well, that whether or not you understand the code is going to go live. The code as it's written is what's going to happen, irrespective of what you think it's going to do or what's in your heads. So I tried to reconcile these two statements and how they both make sense. And I came up with this diagram that I think sort of helps a little bit. We've got our domain experts and our architects and our system experts and our developer stuck in the middle, trying to learn from the domain experts and check their understanding. And Andrea, with bite-sized architecture sessions, is saying, do this better, collaborate better, share knowledge between yourselves better, because as a domain expert, you might think the system is going to do one thing, but actually what the developer is going to build is what they think or what they've understood of your intention. So there's this knowledge sharing element between humans. But what Tudor's saying is that, you know, you've still got to translate that knowledge into code. And so he wants you to do this better and to understand the code better and to read the code better so that you can embrace legacy systems and you can interpret how that legacy code is working, and try and make more sense of it. And I think you need both of these ways of thinking, because in reality, all of it together is the overall system. And in the meantime, you've got the system that's out there, the code, the technology components influencing the humans who use them. As I've heard Nick Tune say, we shape our tools and our tools shape us. So this is all affecting each other. And we're trying to do a better job through DDD practices to share knowledge between each other. And we're trying to do a better job through you know, IDE tools and other development practices and DDD tactical patterns to understand our code better. But what we can understand all of it is as a flow of knowledge through the system, through encoding it into our brains and encoding it into code. I saw a question go up from Christina. Did you?
It's more a remark, because I think that you need to put the right circle several times, because you also have what your colleagues shipped, which
Yes.
you have no idea about, or your
Exactly.
cloud provider shipped yesterday and you have no idea about. So it's getting bigger and bigger.
It is. It is. And I'm glad you asked that. You said that because actually you are preempting a little bit what's coming in the next slide. So that's, I think, the sign of a good talk, hopefully. Now, the key thing here is that humans are non-fungible. You know, one of the things about socio-technical systems is that people come along and they go, okay, humans, teams, people are components of the system. I know how to work with systems. I write code. I design technology. I'll just treat all of the humans like technology components. I'll treat the teams like plug and play blocks. I'll say, hey, we've got a platform team. That team can do X, or we've got an enabling team, which will provide X, Y as a service. And now we've got a value stream aligned team, and we'll give them this value stream and they'll become experts in it and they'll just ship code in that space. And this is, I think, a bit of a reductionistic view, and it's a bit of a shame because as humans, we are individuals. We've got people with names in roles. People change roles, people leave companies, and the knowledge in each of our heads is unique. And there's something that I think obviously special about the fact that we are human and not technology. And part of that is our uniqueness. And so in reality, we might have two different pieces of code that are coupled. So we might see them as having change coupling. If I change this piece of the code, I have to change that piece of the code. And I think that there is a similar kind of change coupling here between the components in our heads. If we can say that this code, when it changes, this other code needs to change, then what's the difference between that and saying when this knowledge in this person's head changes, then the knowledge in that person's head also needs to change? The knowledge in our heads is coupled. If it doesn't change in sync, we have problems. And so we have change coupling between different developers. And if that's not explicit, if that's not well understood, then we can have all sorts of problems. And even worse than that, if someone leaves, we have a broken system. I really like this way of thinking about it, because if people lose knowledge or if the knowledge gets out of sync, we're not just saying that there's a, you know, oh, that's a shame. We're saying we've literally changed the system. We've removed a component of the system. How can the system continue to operate when a component of it has been removed? It needs to repair itself. It needs time to repair. It needs time for the knowledge to proliferate around, for the components to be come back into alignment and into sync. So I think as much as I want to reinforce that humans are not to be treated as fungible tokens, there's value in thinking about the fact that people are components of the system and that changes to people are going to significantly affect the overall system, the system that can change itself, because we are, as I said, the system that changes itself. So A final few sort of opinions / theory bits before I get on to demoing something that I'm trying to do about all of this. Technical debt. This is a topic of much debate, and lots of people have different opinions on it. I think that it's a bit of a shame, but over time, we've evolved a view that technical debt is just any shortcut that we take. I think that kind of dismisses the value of what Ward Cunningham originally intended. And I think this quote sums it up really well. I'm never in favor of writing code poorly, but I am in favor of writing code to reflect your current understanding of a problem, even if that understanding is partial. And so through the lens that I've just explained, we can see that he's kind of talking about an open socio-technical system. He's talking about knowledge. The knowledge is a critical part. The understanding is a critical part. And he's saying that we don't necessarily have a full understanding, but we have to get started anyway, because the process of writing the system and building it will build our knowledge. And so in a sense, this leads us to a definition of technical debt as being the difference between the way it has been built and the way we would have built it if we had known at the start what we know now. And I think if you adopt that definition of technical debt, then all other ways of understanding it, i.e. technical shortcuts, become really what they should be understood as, which is unprofessional engineering. Yes, I went there. Now, there's another understanding here of coupling. So Kent Beck, if people were fortunate enough to see him at DDD Europe and a few other conferences last year talking about some of the ideas that he's been writing about in his book, Tidy First, articulated the cost of a system in this way. He said the cost of a system is approximately equal to the cost of changing the system. That when you look at large systems, whilst there's obviously an initial build cost, it's the lifetime cost of changing it that is the big and a big proportion of the change of the cost. So fundamentally, the cost is the cost of the change. And when you look at all the changes that get done to a system, some of them are very small and quick and easy, and then some of them become very large. And those large ones become dominant in the cost factoring of the maintenance of the system. And one way of thinking about the cost of big changes is that those are the changes that spread. They're the changes where you think you just need to change one part and it turns out you need to change 10. And this is coupling. This is how he defines coupling. It's the impact of changes that need to be synchronized across the system. And so it allows him to define coupling as being with respect to a specific change, with respect to the state of a system at a point in time, and with respect to a specific change, because one change that comes along might be easily handled, and another change that comes along might be really hard to handle. And so is the system tightly coupled or not? Well, with respect to the first change, it's not very coupled, but with respect to the second change, it is. So it's hard. What he's basically saying is that coupling is not a property of a system on its own. It's a property of a system with respect to a change that comes along. And so design is trying to predict the likely changes that come so that we can minimize the cost of those likely changes. And there's some really interesting work being done by Barry O'Reilly in residuality theory around, how accurate can we actually be with some of these predictions about likely changes. And I'm not going to go into that because I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I think that's an interesting space to watch at the moment. Now, I think that when you bring this socio-technical lens and you think about knowledge in people's heads as being a component of the system, we can bring another lens to this, which is that these big changes, as well as being the impact of coupling in the code and the fact that we have to change multiple parts of the system at once, I think you could also argue that it's proportional to the accuracy, completeness, and relevancy of the knowledge in the right heads. Because how often have you had a change come along and just luckily the person handling it happened to be someone that knew exactly how to do it. And even though they had to go and change 10 parts of the system to make it, they were able to do that because they already had that knowledge. They understood the system well enough, they understood the domain well enough, and they were able to affect the change. And maybe it was harder than another change, but at least because they had that knowledge, they were able to do it. Versus a change that comes along and someone says, well, I think I just have to change this part, and then they change it and it breaks something, and they find out that then that they have to change something else. And the change slowly proliferates through the system as you learn by breaking the different parts that it was coupled to. I think in my experience, this is a huge impact on the cost of change. And so I think that keeping knowledge in people's heads is a really important part, just as important as trying to align the design with the likely future changes, because it's the thing that keeps you able to respond to those changes more effectively. And when you have knowledge lost, either because we forget or because people leave, I think this leads to the sensation of a tightly coupled and system riddled with technical debt. I'm not sure what's going on with these red lines on the screen. Is that me? Is that
It
a
must be
Siri
you.
thing?
Hey, my bad. Actually, I was trying to zoom in the screen, but I couldn't able to do that.
Okay.
I think I
No
cleaned all the
problems.
annotations now. It's a Zoom thing, I think.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
So,
it was too low, so I was trying to, and I joined just now. I joined late.
Don't worry about it. It's grand.
Yeah.
Don't worry
no
about it.
problems at all. No problems at all. Thank you for letting us know. Yeah, so to recap, so I think that knowledge in people's heads and or absence thereof can have a significant impact on the cost of change. Now, when I think about this, it leads me to this idea of phenomenological software. Phenomenology, that's a mouthful, is the idea of that things are an experience. What's the phenomenon that we experience? And phenomenological software is this idea that we need to think more about the experience of working with the code. What does it feel like to work with the code? If the code is easy to work with, it feels loosely coupled. It feels like there's low technical debt. If the code is hard to work with, it feels tightly coupled. It feels like there's high technical debt. And as we've seen, if the knowledge is not maintained in people's heads, we can have the experience of a system being very hard to work with. Whereas if the knowledge is maintained, we can have the experience of it being very easy to work with. And I find this absolutely fascinating because what it suggests to me is that if we define coupling as the cost of change, if we then follow from that coupling is an experience of working with the code, then we can convert a system from a loosely coupled system to a tightly coupled system just by changing the team members who are owning the maintenance of that system without changing a line of code. And similarly, we can convert a system from a tightly coupled system to a loosely coupled system simply by allowing those team members to gain and maintain the knowledge that they need to have in order to work with that system effectively. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing you should do. Obviously, design is important. There are real technical interactions that are going on. There are real integrations and integration strengths, as Vlad Kononov puts it, that mean that there is an increased risk that changes are going to propagate across a code base and that there's more knowledge that needs to be kept in people's heads than there otherwise would be. So this stuff is important. Domain-driven design is important. Designing loosely coupled bounded contexts is important, and aiming for loose coupling and evolving your system over time to reflect changes in the domain is all important. But I think that through what I've just shared with you, I hope you agree with me that helping developers maintain knowledge in their heads about the domain and about the system is just as significant and a hugely important in helping developers work with and become effective parts of the system that is changing itself. So that is the theory part of what I wanted to share with you this evening. I'm about to go and demonstrate a tool I've been working on, which has been heavily influenced by this way of thinking about things. Because what I was trying to do was work out, is there a way to improve the way we manage knowledge from in the sense of making it easier to share, easier to keep up to date, and easier to check its validity over time? Because as we saw through some of these diagrams, these are things that will help maintain knowledge in people's heads. And so what I've started on, and I'm not saying that this is a perfect solution by any means, but it's something that I think can help, is a tool that works in the IDE and can help us with capturing domain knowledge and evolving it over time. So I'm just going to switch the screen shares from this Miro board over to my IDE, and I'll start doing a demo over there. But I'm going to keep the Miro board up, and I encourage you to stay on it because I'm going to be asking people to contribute some ideas that we're going to be capturing in this tool in the way that it manages knowledge. And you're very welcome to use, I'm going to create a new frame somewhere here. And I'll ask you to use this space to throw stickies in as I ask questions. Now, when we get to the other part of it. There we go. So give me 1 second. While I'm doing this, are there any questions or comments or thoughts people would like to share on any of that? I don't know if you want to call it theory or opinion. I'm happy to go with either.
Just feel free. All of you should be able to unmute yourself. I think your thoughts are very provoking. So just moving people from one team to another. What about the work they did before? Then it becomes tightly coupled. So in the system, it might have some problems.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's, I mean, I do like the idea of moving people from team to team. I think it can help with sharing knowledge, and I think it can help with spreading awareness. But yeah, like if you look at it through this lens, absolutely, it introduces coupling between the teams potentially. Certainly when you say, well, we need to consult with so-and-so who's off in this other team now. He's the only person that knows how to do this stuff. I see there's a question in
Hey,
the chat.
Yes, one question in the chat.
Someone's
if you-
asking, there's interesting information in the Miro board. Yes, the board will be accessible after the meetup. No
Could we
problems with
maybe export it as a PDF to link it
that.
as
Yeah,
a
we can do that
resource?
at the end.
Excellent.
No problems.
yeah. Hey, hi, Chris. Um,
Hey.
yeah. This is the first time that I joined into this meetup group, and unfortunately, I joined a bit late. It's better,
Mhm.
like, can you share this recording link also at the end to this chat? And
Mhm.
yeah, I was so excited to see like how DDD works, and I want to use this as a platform to learn. Yeah,
Mhm.
I hope I can hear back your recordings, and I can get some information. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, no problems. Thanks for joining. All right, just bear with me a second. I'm switching devices because the next part of the demo is on a laptop. So, second. I don't know, Andrea or Christina, are there any other questions on the chat that I should have a look at?
None that I can see. Also, for whoever spoke there, sorry, I didn't catch your name. You can find all the resources about this talk in this website that I just put on the chat. Like, if you don't, whatever we update, will be updated there, as well as in probably other places. But for sure, that'll be there. So links to the recording of this, the PDF of the Miro board, a fun meme I just made, all of that probably there.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem. So someone is asking, Chris, different agents in socio-technical systems have radically different incentives. How are they supposed to align those incentives? Also, feel free to unmute if you feel comfortable.
Look, that's a huge question that I think is beyond the scope of tonight's talk. I'd love to dig into that. I don't think there's one answer. It's cultural. It's I mean, by cultural, I mean the broader environmental culture of, the environment that the organization exists in, and also cultural in terms of the culture of the company. I think it depends a lot on things like capital structures, and by that I mean ownership structures. And I think that there's some really interesting work being done by open systems theory people like Trond Horsland, who are resurfacing some work by Marilyn Emery and others who've done some really fascinating work into like how you can design more effective organizations that have that leverage open systems theory to think about empowering teams to be like not just autonomous in this kind of like naive sense, but genuinely owning both the way that they work and the goals that they're seeking. And I think a lot of that work is really interesting in terms of considering how to align incentives and to help keep things on track. I'm also really interested in some of the work that's being done by post-growth economic theorists around cooperative ownership structures and community ownership structures, because I think a lot of the dysfunction that we see in companies that are driven by these sort of highly autocratic, hierarchical, top-down decision making is driven by fundamentally the ownership structure of the company, and it doesn't matter how holocratic or flat you try and make the engineering team. At the end of the day, you have a board of directors who represent shareholders, who hold the executive team to account for acting in the best interests of the shareholders. And the legal accountabilities that are part of that structure mean that at some point there's a boundary to the way in which people can operate autonomously, and there's a control, like a directive control that comes from that boundary point. And I think most organizations inevitably proliferate that directive control down all the way across the whole organization, and some try really hard to protect boundaries of genuine autonomy where people can be fulfilled and have mastery and purpose and feel like they're connected to a reason for what they're doing. But I think all of us have to keep in mind at all times that no matter what the stated purpose of the company might be, it is almost always to make more money for the shareholders. That is it. You can say our purpose is to, revolutionize the way people communicate. You can say our purpose is to, improve collaboration in teams. You can say our purpose is to improve efficiency in hospitals. But at the end of the day, if you're a private company, your primary purpose is to make more money for the shareholders. And so I think
this
I'm
is
literally riffing here off my
this is like this is the Montalion law of any time you talk about systems, you wind up in capitalism. This is the Diana Montalion law of when you speak about systems, you'll wind up talking about capitalism. I just made up that law, by the way, but it came up so many times. So yeah.
I think it's in the context of knowledge management, not in general monetary incentive sense. So
I see. Sorry, I took the question very broadly. You mean incentives around keeping the knowledge maintained and keeping it up to date? Look, I think I don't really have an answer for that. I think this is an emerging space. I'm really looking forward to people trying to be more intentional about this. I'm keen to see how people adopt some of the tools that people are working on, like the one I'm about to demonstrate, and others that I'm going to share that are out there. And see what evolves in the community about how these things happen. My hope is that the incentive for working on this is that, sorry, the incentive for maintaining the documentation is that if the structures demonstrate the value of it in shorter feedback cycles, that will incentivize people to do it. Because when knowledge is captured in wikis and it's invisible and hidden and distant, it's really hard to keep it maintained, and really hard to motivate people to even not just maintain it, but to even look at it. So it was interesting at the start to hear that people do some collaborative exercises, because I think just pointing people at a wiki and saying, read that, and now you're a domain expert, is obviously a nonsense. And a number of times people have joined a company and you've been sent to the documentation and you start reading it and you ask a question and someone says, oh, sorry, actually, that's a bit out of date. We haven't, we haven't brought that up to what the latest practice there is. I'm sure we can all relate to that experience. So yeah, I think that, there's things that we can do with tooling to improve it, but like I said, even though I answered a slightly different question to what you intended, I think the start of the answer was the same, which is it's about culture, and it's about practices that become part of the culture. Because if you don't have a culture that takes this stuff seriously and cares about it, and I think educating people about why it's important can help with that, no amount of tooling is going to solve the problem. This is another thing that, so the comment I made earlier that, a risk with socio-technical systems is people start to treat the non-technology components as though they are technology components, as though they are fungible tokens, or as though they are, plug and play blocks, whether that's people or teams. There's another risk, which is that, people think that you can solve the social problems with technology. And I don't think that you necessarily can. I think you can help. I think you can, you can try and provide support, but ultimately it's up to people to solve social problems. The technology is not going to do it for itself. So I know that's probably not a very satisfying answer, but that's just, I guess, how I think about.
Well, that's just the truth. There's another question here in the chat that I think it kind of brings us back to the demo you want to do, which is one of the challenges, how to make a contract across the team that we need to store basically it's across, basically how do you share this contract on the domain knowledge across teams? And if then they proceed to say, my personal experience is that team members often, one, do not consider information valuable enough to store it, or two, try to treat it as someone else's responsibility to write it down. So I think this kind of nicely, segues you into the very nice demo that you're going to do. But I think it's really important to mention all of the things that you mentioned, and I really liked your, enabling the Montalion laws. So that's good.
Excellent. All right. Well, with that, then I might share this other screen and we'll get started on the demo, because, like I said, there is some tooling that will help with this. So I'm going to share the whole desktop, and then hopefully you can see my idea here. So, okay. So what we're going to do here is so this is an IDE. It's a blank project, Visual Studio Code. And I've got this extension installed called Context div. So this is what I've been working on. It's not just in Visual Studio Code. I've just recently launched it into the IntelliJ platform. I'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is that it's to help with the complex domain or project-specific language, so particularly about terminology and the domain knowledge that we can capture in our terminology. So to give you a bit of an idea about how it works, you want to capture in your source control repository a file. At the moment, it's called a YAML file. So what I really want to do now, actually, is I want to do some live collaborative domain modeling. So if there's anyone on the call, if you're still on the Miro board, if you come down to this frame at the bottom, I'd love people to put some stickies up there about domains that they work in, and maybe some definitions of terms that are important in those domains. So maybe you work in, I don't know, healthcare or finance or recruitment or whatever it might be, and throw some stickies on the board with some domains and some terminology, and I'll start building that into the tool. Just
can I get the Miro link?
Aside. Christine, do you have that handy? Sorry about that.
Can I get the Miro link, Chris?
It's on the chat, please. Oh wait, I'm sending it out. Oop. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's some interesting domains there. So let's start with EV charging. Who added that one there? If you could add some a note related to that, just with a term, like a particular word that's particularly like an interesting term of art in that domain. Charge session, yeah, sure. All right, let's go with that. So what we do then is we define this in our definitions file. And when we hover over that word, we get this pop-up here. Now it says charge session is undefined because we haven't given it a definition yet. But you can see here it works in the YAML file. And if I was to go and create like a C# file, you can see here, because that term's defined, I already get it in my autocomplete. So I've got maybe charge session or charge session. So I'm going to create a class, and I can get that documentation here as well. But it's not very interesting because it's not saying anything. But the reason I demo this is to highlight that the way this tool works is it's not tied to any specific programming language. It's tied to the human words. It tries to interpret the code the way a human does. So let's give charge session a definition. So whoever's doing EV charging charge session, could you just add some text that would define that term? I can make up.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
Charge session, that's something that describes all the properties of electric vehicle charge session, which has happened.
Okay, so
this is an object
if we
which
capture that as we might say a period of time, an electric vehicle spends charging. Is that a reasonable definition?
Period of time and the amount of energy consumed.
Okay, cool. Including
that's not the full definition, but I feel like that's good enough.
I'm sure. Cool. So now we've given it a definition. We can see that definition there, and it's defined in this YAML file. So once again, it's going to show up everywhere. Period of time an electric vehicle spends charging, the amount of energy consumed. And again, because of that, if we happen to have some front-end code, maybe a TypeScript, export function charge session component, we're going to get it here as well. And I think this is just also highlighting that because it's just looking for the text, even though there's a suffix here of component, still found the word charge session. And we've got charge session, a period of time an electric vehicle spends charging, including the amount of energy consumed. So what I was really trying to do here is to say, as a human, if I'm a human and I have this domain knowledge, I'm going to look at this code. And every time I see the word charge session, I'm going to bring this definition into my head. And I want other developers who don't have the knowledge I have to also get that whenever they see this word. And so it's also going to pop up in comments as well because of exactly the same reason. So up and down the stack, whether in the front end, the back end, or even markdown files, it's going to work in here as well, which is pretty cool. Now, one thing that we can do also is we can say that this is...
There's one question, Chris, about abbreviations. About that, maybe
abbreviations.
you speak up, yeah, exactly. How does it handle abbreviations?
Yeah, so there are some domains where you or the people or the domain experts usually using abbreviations. The question is that that term can appear as an abbreviation and as a line of words. For instance, in my domain, the ETA, estimated time of arrival. They're talking always about ETA, but it means actually the estimated time of arrival. If I'm using ETA in my code, is it going to be able to resolve it?
Yep. Yep. So we've got this aliases feature. And so if I hover over the word session, it comes up with charge session and it highlights that alias session is an alias. And if I hover now over ETA, it will say estimated time of arrival, the time that's estimated something will arrive, and it lists the aliases there. And so you can have multiple aliases, even just maybe ET is an alias, and then you get multiple listed aliases there. Arrival time might be an alias. Now, this one's tricky. Like if you've got multiple words, it doesn't find it like that. But in the code, if you had like at least like a piece of code syntax, it would detect that that is the same as arrival time, and it would give you all of the definitions there. So it tries to be, I would say, like very greedy around trying to interpret the possibility that that a piece of code, so a piece of text means what you want it to mean. I saw another question come in, like, what if the domain terminology is actually like a piece of coding definition? And look, you know, this can happen. You know, a group of students studying the same subject. So if I hover over a class, I get the definition. But if I go in here, I'm going to get it there too. Now, obviously, that's not ideal, but you know, it's an evolving work in progress. So maybe one day we'll be able to filter out things that are sort of language elements or syntax elements. But right now, it just looks for the text. So yeah, to answer that question, that is how it would be found. So we've got names, we've got definitions, we've got aliases. One of the things that I really like and that I was really keen to see happen here is to include example sentences. So was it Yuri giving us the charge session? Give me a sentence as it would be said by like a domain expert in relation to a charge session.
Yeah, let me think. So we had a bunch of charge sessions which are incorrect. We will have to revert them.
That's an incredibly technical sentence to be using. What about a customer? Would a customer use the word charge session? Like, would they say, I was really happy with the performance of my last charge session? Is that
wow. I was about to say, guys, I'm looking at my invoice and I see a wrong charge session. But your option is much better.
Wrong charge session. And we could also do, I'm really happy with the performance of my last charge session. So what we get now is this extra bit at the bottom, charge session usage example. So I'm looking at my invoice, I see a wrong charge session, or I'm really happy with the performance of my last charge session. And this is something I really want to encourage people. If you do adopt this tool, take the time to put some usage example sentences in there. I think like we learn by example. It's why example mapping is such a powerful tool. Seeing the way that words are said in real sentences is so important. And I think that, you know, multiple examples, I think there's an example there saying it makes sense to split positive and negative examples. Absolutely good to have all of those. I haven't split them in terms of the data structure. Maybe that's something we'd look at later. But the key thing here is that there are examples. And I really encourage people, if they adopt the tool, to make use of this usage example so that when developers are looking at the code and they see this pop up or they see it in the autocomplete. So as we were talking before, we're going to get the autocomplete here. You can also, as you're browsing the list of autocomplete options, you can see the definition off to the side as well. And so that kind of helps you choose the right term. If I start an autocomplete and I've got all of these other terms, the other thing that's kind of cool is that it doesn't know whether you're going to, like, what your coding style is. Maybe you're creating a constant, maybe you're creating a method. So it gives you like Pascal case and camel case and snake case and all of the different options. But if you start typing the capital, it gives you like a full all capitals option. So everything, so if I was going to do, const good, it sort of works out like that. And then you get the definition there as well. So charge session and charge session. So this is pretty cool. We're starting to see that by storing it in the repository, which I think everyone probably can understand the benefits of. Some of the early adopters of this tool said that actually the value that they really got out of it was just when they would make a change and it would appear in a PR, and the whole team would see the definition change in the PR and start to realize, oh, hang on, this thing is not what I thought it was. Which is, when we think back to those diagrams I showed about knowledge sharing and trying to interpret the code, it's all about, like, this tool is an intervention that's attempting to assist with that, and to work on that. So there's a couple of questions coming in here. I'm seeing, what about team members who don't work with the code? I have a demo for you at the end, and another one about developers that work in multiple languages. So as you can see here, it works in C# and works in TypeScript. It works in literally any language because it doesn't really care what the language is. It's not looking for language features.
I don't
it's
think,
looking for...
I think it is about human language.
Oh, human languages. Excellent. That's a really good question. I have been pondering that. It's on, I would say, the backlog. Have not got to the point yet of being able to offer it. You could sort of misuse the aliases feature to offer aliases in other languages, but I would like to offer better, I would say, first-class support for multilingual code bases and for teams working in multiple languages. And the analysis I've done of that suggests that there's a few different a few different ways you can think about it. You might have a single language code base, but multiple teams, the teams from different countries who need to have the code base translated into their language. But also you might have multilingual code bases where because of acquisition or mergers or whatever, parts of the code base are in German and parts of the code base are in English, and you want the same definition to show up no matter which term is in the code. So I haven't, to be honest, implemented any of that yet. I've been pondering it though, and I'd like to see that come up in the future maybe. And since it's an open source tool, would really love people to, check it out and maybe think about getting involved. I just saw a question come in about, can it help with definitions across multiple contexts? So yeah, there's the actual name of the tool, Contextive, is exactly because of that. So it's got a few other properties you can put in at the context level. So let's say we're in the EV charging context. And if I hover over a term now, I get this sort of high-level heading, EV charging context, and I can put in here a domain vision statement to manage the process of charging EVs. And EVs itself is an acronym, so maybe we have electric vehicle with aliases EV. So now if I hover over charge session, I get EV charging context, the domain vision statement to manage the process of charging EVs. And of course, if I hover over EV, it gives me electric vehicle. I haven't given it a definition yet though.
I have a question for this. Actually, three have a question. Has a question. I don't know if you answered it. I think not. If you can generate a glossary automatically.
Not yet, but that is also on the roadmap and coming up very soon. I've had a few requests around either just transforming it into HTML or maybe pushing it into Notion or Confluence, and I am keen to explore doing that sometime this year. So yeah, I expect that to come soon, but it's not there just yet. But if you do go to the Git repo, you can see there's like there's issues in issue history, but there's also like a checklist on the README with some thoughts around things that could come in the future. And if any of them appeal to you, please do create issues in the GitHub and give me your thoughts on what you'd like it to do and why. And I'm really happy to take a look at that this year. But to get back to the question about multiple or different definitions in different contexts. So as an example here, we've got a charge session, and I can imagine that this term might crop up in multiple contexts. So maybe we have a context which is about charging the EVs. and maybe we have like an analytics context, or I don't know, Yuri, if you've got, is there another, maybe to get it more accurate and not just me speculating, is there another context that you would use the term charge session, which is a slightly different definition?
Not this particular term. So let's keep speculating.
But
just make something.
Make something up. Or is there another term that would make more sense?
What about accounting?
Oh, yeah.
Invoicing, you need to invoice them.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe in the invoicing domain vision statement, sorry, in the invoicing context, we would say,
yeah, in invoicing, you can say a charge session is a cost of charge session, a cost of charging vehicle. That's, yeah.
Apply to an invoice for a charge session. Yeah. So at the moment, I've put these two contexts in here, and if I hover over a charge session, I get both of the contexts. I get the EV charging context and I get the invoicing context, and both the definitions are listed there with the emojis here to sort of illustrate the key definition parts of it. Because we haven't given the tool yet any guidance as to how to identify which context we're operating in. So if we want to do that, I'll just set up a brief structure here. So say we've got the EV charging subfolder and a invoicing subfolder. And let's say that our charge session CS is in the invoicing one, and we'll copy it into the EV charging. Now at the moment, it's still going to show me both definitions, but if I put in place some paths, and it supports multiple paths in case you need to know about it in multiple location.
Someone's asking if you can add images or plant UML.
I'll get to that in a second. So as a result of putting these paths here to say that the EV charging context is located in the EV charging path and the invoicing context in the invoicing path, if I'm working on this code, I will see the charging context definition and usage examples. And if I'm working in this code, I will see the invoicing context definition. So yeah, it's called contextive precisely because it's trying to be more context aware. Now, obviously, if you've got a repository per context, this is pretty straightforward. You just have a separate definitions file, one in each context. But if you've got multiple contexts, multiple bounded contexts in a single repository, like you're doing a mono repo, which I think is actually a really good pattern for a lot of teams, particularly smaller ones, you can do it in this way and have multiple contexts in the same file with the paths to help split out which context you're working on so it knows what to do. One side effect of this, though, is because we've put the paths here, it stops working in the YAML file itself. So because it says, hey, you're not in a path. So if you do want that, we need to do this as well. Now, as you can see here, I can put that same path in both contexts. So now if I do charge session here, I get both definitions. And in this one, I just get the one. And in this one, I just get the one. And I think this could be useful in, say, like anti-corruption layers or boundary points where you actually want to have the definitions from multiple contexts show up at the same time because you're doing some sort of interaction or translation between the contexts. Were there any other questions as we were going, or? How do we share the definitions across several repositories? This is a really good question. So I had the very good fortune to meet Eric Evans at DDD Europe last year, and I had about 10 minutes to show him this tool. And I think he liked what he saw, but I told him about my challenges with people who were asking about sharing the definitions file across multiple repositories because one bounded context had been implemented across, say, multiple Lambdas or multiple microservices, which each had their own repository. And his response was, well, maybe they don't deserve your tool. So I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer, but I think I would agree with him that sharing a context across multiple repositories is a bit of an anti-pattern for a bunch of reasons we don't really have time to get into. But really, just because if the bounded context is the boundary of change and a repository is a tool for managing change, you should probably align the boundary of change with the boundaries of the tool that helps you manage your changes. So I'm a big fan of context per repository. And if you need to deploy that context into multiple runtime processes, then you use some sort of path-based filtering in your CI system to do that. But yeah, if you are in a world where you have multiple repositories and need to share the definitions file across those repositories, the way that I've done a demo of this for a team that wanted to do it, and I think it works, but it's got some clunkiness to it. And that is to embed the definitions file into, say, like a shared component. Like, so if you're sharing a NuGet package or an NPM package or a Maven package or something that is from a common repository that gets shared amongst the other repositories, then you can embed the definitions file in that, treat it as like part of the library. And then there's a settings file that you can, I think it's, no, I can't remember the name of the file, sorry. But you can create a setting file and you can point Context at a different location. So you can point it to wherever the package management system has dumped the contents of that package. And so you can pick it up effectively as a library that's distributed. Now, do I think that's a good idea? I mean, it works. It's clunky because it makes it hard to change. So if you're working in one of the downstream components that depends on that library, it's really hard to change the definitions. You have to go to the upstream component, and then obviously to redeploy it, you have to bump the version on the dependency, even if you're only changing the definitions, which is a bit clunky. I saw someone say git submodule. Look, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole bunch of technical ways to handle the issue. But I just want to get back to Eric's answer, which is that any investment you put into technical solutions to sharing the definitions file across multiple repositories should be considered a workaround for an incorrect design of your repository layout. I just, like, in my opinion, that's the only way to interpret that. So if that's how you want to spend your time and energy, go for it. But I personally would encourage you to consolidate all the code related to one bounded context into a single repository, make your life a lot easier. And not just because of the ease of managing the definitions file, but because what does it say if you have this definition file? It says that all of the domain concepts in the definitions file are far away from the other places that those domain concepts exist. So what that tells me is if the domain concept changes, you're going to have to find lots of different places that need to be updated. Whereas if all of the places that the code that manifests this design concept are in the same repository, then when the domain concept changes, they're all going to be in one spot and easy to change. And this applies not just to multiple multiple repositories for backend code, but this is part of the idea of the vertical slice architecture, where you should be storing your front-end code in the same repository as your backend code if it relates to the same domain concepts of the same bounded context. Christina, a question?
Again, completeness maybe, I don't know. So now we are on the social technical part. So and back to your presentation before, this is where it gets hurt or not. So if you have one team managing three different repositories because they earn them, then they will find a way, and they should find a way to have a common language and consolidate the three repositories later during the next years. But I think several questions here are about two different needs. One is, for example, someone asked about sharing this, and of course, need to be shared with the business experts. This does not need to be in the repository. So generating HTML files and having a common library where everybody collects or where everybody releases their documentation, I think it is a totally different thing than sharing the file, because I need the file to have it in the IDE. The business expert does not need this. They want to have it on one place and see it. They don't need an IDE, a real sharing. They want a print, something that they can read. So it is an output. They just want a common place or one place for an output.
Potentially, yeah. I think if these are the questions that are coming up, it might be time to move on to.
Yeah, well, it was one question about how business people use this, because they, of course, they need to align.
In a second about this. So yeah, I'll show that shortly about how to share this more proactively with people that are not working in the IDE, because I think you made a comment of like you need the file or you need to share the file around. Like the definitions file is a source of the data. The purpose of the tool is to surface the information in all the places that it needs to be. And so the first priority for me was to do it in the IDE for the developers to see. And so that's why it's all about hovers and autocomplete so that you can see it very easily. And as a developer, you can just, you don't even need to know where the definitions file is. You can just, start working on the code and these things will pop up for you straight away. Now, I would like to improve the system over time so that from this pop-up, you can link directly back to the file, or you can have like context menus to edit and change the definitions and so on. That's not there yet. But I can see that's doing something that comes with time. But then you start thinking about, well, where are the other places that people might be working when they want to have access to these definitions? And that's where the next part of the demo is going to go. But just before we get to that, the last bit I want to show you while we're working in an IDE is what happens if you are in a different IDE. So because it's implemented using a thing called the language server protocol, which means I've been able to, with some degree of success, integrate it into the IntelliJ platform, which is pretty new. So this only got released about 2 days ago, and in some, you could argue that this meetup is kind of a launch party for Context into the IntelliJ platform. So my thanks to JetBrains for launching support for the language server protocol. And what this means now is that you can get exactly those same definitions over in IntelliJ, and if so, you've got some developers working in using Rider or IntelliJ and some using VS Code, you've both got access to the same definitions. Because my vision here is really that this should be treated as a ubiquitous language, and ubiquitous means everywhere. So we should have access to these definitions everywhere. We should be able to see them everywhere. We should, everybody that needs to have access to them should have access to them. So I'm pretty excited to be demoing this in IntelliJ because it's taken a lot of work over the last 2 weeks. Yeah, now it's there. So hopefully if you'd use one of the IntelliJ JetBrains tools, you can go and check it out. I should warn you though, the language server protocol support is very new to that platform. And certainly some things are not acting exactly the way I would like them to in some files. But if you check out the warnings on the GitHub, it'll sort of give you an idea of what to expect. And I'm hoping that will get improved over time, because they're definitely showing very strong sign that they're keen to and actively supporting the improvement of support for tools like this in the platform. So hopefully this will come cool. So there's a question around what do you think of definitions at the boundary of the system might need to be inputs or outputs to other components? I think, yeah, that's an interesting one. If you're in a mono repo, it's pretty easy to do because you can use these paths to share a definition between two code bases. And so at a boundary point, if you need to know both definitions, you can have access to it. If you are split across multiple repositories, I think there's some work to be done to solve that more elegantly, but that's something there. There's a question there about, can you combine Contextive with code documentation as it uses the same view? Yeah, absolutely. And it's designed specifically so that I'm going to forget how to do this now, but I think it's like, everyone remind me how to, is it summary? Yeah, it's summary. Code documentation. I hope this works. Did not test this. It probably won't work actually because I haven't got, no, maybe back in here. No, unfortunately I haven't got the IDE tooling set up to interpret the code languages. So you'll have to trust me that it does work and that the code definitions, so like the code comments that use like XML docs and so on, will show up at the top, and the contextive definitions will show up underneath them. So Joken's question, it does work. I just haven't got the demo set up to illustrate that right now.
You have a code snippet in the chat.
Unfortunately, I don't have access to that on the laptop that I'm doing the demo on right now. So
okay,
let's come back to that in a second.
There is another question about, I don't know, it's a question from Daniel saying that the challenge is to have a bounded context definition across multiple technical solutions. So custom codes, standard software, whatever. low code.
Yeah, there's definitely some things to explore there. I think if you've got some of these edge cases or you've got some of these scenarios that you think are a bit complex and you'd like to make use of the tool, please do raise an issue on the GitHub and give me some more detail on your specific circumstances. And I'd be really keen to explore and collaborate on coming up with a solution that would work for you. I've got some other ideas for how to share these definitions in more places, but the more data I have on the different patterns that people are using, the easier, well, not necessarily easy in all cases, but the more likely that we can come up with a solution that will help make it work. And actually, that's probably a good time then to go into the last part of the demo. So this is a little bit of a very hopeful point because I've set up a POC. And actually, I did not get a chance to test this today because you had me on the tell, but I actually just got COVID last week and I've been recovering from it. I've only just started to feel better today. So a little bit unprepared. So I'm going to give this a try and hopefully the demo gods are with me. And if everyone is sending good wishes, this will work. What I'm going to do here is run this curl command, which is going to sync up the definitions file into a Lambda. It seems to have worked. And what that Lambda is doing is acting as a Slack bot. So let me get up into here and go into the Contex div demo. So if I'm going to say, the customer complained about a charge session, if the demo gods are working well, then in a second, this will come back with a reply. And it's Contex div replying to say, here's a reminder, this is what the definition of a charge session is in the EV charging context. And there's some buttons here to help with updating the definition or seeing usage examples. Now, like I said, this is a POC. It's not live yet. You can't get this code, unfortunately. I am planning to launch it in an open source way, maybe as a container or something, so you can run it in your environment. You can have your CI system synchronize the definitions file into it and set it up as a Slack bot. I may also run it as a shared service that people can access. I have hopefully doing something with that later this year. Obviously, this reminder is not going to be sent on every single usage of the term. That would be crazy. But I've got some ideas around different experiments to run around, frequency. So maybe one thing is to only send the reminders every 2 weeks for every usage of the term, or maybe to send the reminder back to a personal message to the person who used it, or maybe to put it back in the channel as a reply, but have some sort of frequency-based thing on a per term basis so that it's not on every usage, but frequently enough that people are prompted to say, hang on, is this still the right definition? And if we clicked here to update the definition, maybe that's a link that takes us to the edit screen in our GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever we manage our repository. So the idea here is to make it easy for, this kind of answers the questions that's come up a couple of times around people who are not working in the IDE, how they're going to see the definition. So this is one way. The other idea that I've got, not made progress on it yet, but again, hopefully sometime soon, is some sort of browser extension where if it was able to access the same data store, it could provide you the same kind of experience as the IDE in the browser. If you're browsing your wiki or even emails in an Outlook web or Gmail, you can get the same sort of tooltip support and autocomplete support with the definitions. And I have to say, when I talk about that and that particular extension, I have a vision that one day, and this is, I guess, a fantasy of how this could work to help bring all parts of the business together in shared understanding, is that someone working on the customer service desk, handling a support ticket in Zendesk, could see a sentence used by a customer and think, hey, this is a really good sentence for this term. I'm going to highlight it and add it to the usage examples. And then within seconds, the developers are looking at that same sentence in the usage examples in their tooltip hover of their IDE. Because I think the more visibility we can get developers into the real way that real customers and real domain experts use the terms and the way they talk about it, I think that can only be a good thing. And so I don't want to discourage people from actually going and having a conversation with their colleagues outside of the engineering team, but something that can make it easier to capture things like usage examples, or to point out that maybe the terminology, the definition as it's currently articulated is not as it's understood by other people outside the engineering team. These kind of things I think could be really helpful. So I'm planning to continue to do more work on that aspect of it this year. Obviously, the priority has been on the IDE stuff. Sorry, is there a question?
This stuff that you just mentioned of, this dream that you have of the help customer services representative adding it. Sometimes the distance between you as a programmer and them is so hard, and maybe when you meet, you don't have a reason to, like, you're like, we were put in the same room, and it's a great excuse for a conversation. So it could be actually like, it could be like, wait, this doesn't make sense, can I talk to them? And suddenly enable and create conversations. Actually, it could be a misunderstanding each way, so the feedback loops kind of increase. So I wouldn't be shy of thinking that it will reduce conversations. Maybe.
Okay,
maybe
cool.
I'm not.
Yeah, that's a nice way of thinking about it. I think you're right. I think something that would be more of like a conversation starter rather than just a dump into thing. I mean, one idea I had was that if, you know, someone who's not in the engineering team, you know, proposes a change to a definition or proposes the addition of a new usage example, then perhaps the system could raise a pull request against the repository with the change and noting who the person was and their contact details so that the team can reach out to them to get clarity. So, you know, there's definitely technical ways to facilitate and foster those conversations. And I certainly hope that we might be able to do that.
I see Martin raised his hand.
Yep.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I see a challenge with people who makes the maintenance of the software. So when we create the software 2 years ago, and then people changed what we saw in your presentation, then they need sometime a better definition or a different definition, and then they create a new one. But this depends on a 2-year-old software. And do we create a new branch for that, or how is the yeah, that's a thing what I had in the past, that we have the gap between timeline of the documentation and timeline of the coding, that code is good enough, but documentation is sometime 2 years later, or translation. Yes.
Yeah.
And when we couple this thing,
yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't pursued this angle of it, but there's another tool that's evolving at the same time that I want to give a shout out to, because it's a guy who's working on this tool. I really like him, and he's got a you might have heard of him, Marijn Huizenveld. He's done quite a lot of DDD talks and been active in the DDD community. He's got a tool called Chameleon. You can check it out at getchameleon.app. And so if you go and check that out, it's a similar tool, but it's focused, like my focus with Contextive is about knowledge sharing and spreading the information around inside the dev team, but also beyond the dev team. So that's why I focused on things like the Slack bot, and I'm starting to think about things like, you know, the browser extension. Marijn's focus is on keeping the code in sync. So exactly to your question, what his tool is focused on is supported refactoring. So as you change the definition, you can then get guidance. So I think it pops up warnings in the IDE saying this term is obsolete, and it gives you support in progressively refactoring that across the code base. It doesn't force you to update it everywhere all at once, but it gives you support in sort of adopting those changes. So I think, you know, if that's of interest, I encourage you to check out his tool there. We've been in conversation about potentially aligning the definitions file structures so that we can have, you know, both people could use both tools, or different people could use different tools with some sort of standardized data structure to support both tools operations. So that's something that's in the works. If you're interested in that, recommend reaching out to one or both of us and, you know, getting some conversation started about how you might like to use that.
Thank you.
I might see if I can put that in the chat there. Let's get Camille. That's right. I should have just copy pasted it. Yep, that was right. Cool. So yeah, there's some evolution in this space. There's multiple people working on it. Myself and Marijn are the two ones that I know making the most progress. And yeah, hopefully we can align our definitions file, and we can start to see a bit of an ecosystem of tools evolve that support and encourage timely and accurate documentation that is really fulfills that promise of the idea of living documentation that's kept up to date as you go. So yeah, I think that's probably most of what I wanted to show in the demo. So I really appreciate everyone's questions as you've been asking them through the thing. Is there any other questions I missed, or any other questions that people might have?
I think the only one we missed was about diagrams, RAM2ML or something.
Yes. So there are some technical constraints with that, particularly around the way that the different IDEs represent information in those tooltips and those hovers. I don't know that you can embed arbitrary images into them. But, you know, they're all evolving rapidly. Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ are pumping out updates all the time. So I wouldn't say never, but right now there's a bit of a technical challenge with that. I think if we were to start looking at like formatting those data files into HTML or into like a Notion page or a Confluence page, then certainly that might make more sense. You could embed like Mermaid.js or PlantUML or something like that and have it show up there. But right now there's some real restrictions on the markdown that will get rendered into those pop-ups. Actually, maybe that's something I could briefly show, is that because the pop-up uses markdown, you can actually use markdown in your definitions file. So you can say, you know, like a period of time, and get, so that's gone. It's made period of time italic. If we do this one, we'll get bold. You can do a part of the definition, another part. So, you know, I think the developers are quite familiar with Markdown, and so that's quite straightforward. But I'm pretty sure if I put like an embedded, I don't think it supports like a ring fence code block. I've never tried that before. Oh, there you go. So you can do a lot of different Markdown in there, which is pretty cool. But I've not seen it work with images. But, you know, something I'm keen to look at. So we'll see. Maybe we can find a way to do that. You can probably tell from a lot of my answers that this is a pretty new tool and it's evolving. It's evolving rapidly, and I love all this feedback. And like I said, if you start using it and you have more feedback, please do jump on and raise issues in the GitHub. And I'd love to try and chat with you and get some progress made on improving it, and hopefully start to see some more adoption and get some more feedback on how people are, like, you know, what would be more valuable to add and improve over time. So I think with that, it's probably a good time to wrap up the demo and wrap up the meetup. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, and everyone that is here. Thank you to everyone that participated, that showed their faces, because I know it's a bit. And so everyone that stayed up and late and early in the morning. Next session is the 2nd of April, and it's on something that some people mentioned on kind of some use of AI. The thing is DDD and domain modeling using AI to accelerate design. So maybe go to our meetup page to sign up for that if you can /want to. And with that, I'm going to stop recording. Boop.